Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to dive into the fascinating toolkit that scholars use to decode ancient texts. We're going beyond just what the words on the page say to understand how they actually create meaning.
For centuries, the answer to that question seemed pretty simple. It was all about the author's intention. But then, there was this huge shift in thinking. People started moving away from trying to get inside an author's head and started focusing on the text itself as the main source of meaning.
So this shift basically split things into two main camps. You have the classic author-centered approach, which is all about history and what the author meant to say. And then you have this more modern text-centered approach, which treats the text like a self-contained puzzle. So today, let's explore two really powerful methods from this text-centered world.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at structuralism, which is all about finding a hidden blueprint in stories. Then we'll check out rhetorical criticism, which analyzes a text like a powerful, persuasive argument. And finally, we'll pull it all together and see why these tools matter so much.
Okay, let's dive right in with our first method. Now, structuralism isn't just a reading technique. It's this whole philosophy that says there are universal patterns of human thought hiding just beneath the surface of literally every story. So the big idea behind structuralism is that the real meaning, it isn't in the words you see on the page, it's in this invisible deep structure, the underlying grammar of the story. The author might not even consciously know it's there, but the structuralist's job, it's to find that blueprint and map it all out.
Think of it this way. The surface structure is the specific building you're looking at. The bricks, the windows, the style of the door. But the deep structure, that's the architectural blueprint that dictates the fundamental design. A blueprint that might be shared by tons of different buildings.
Okay, so how do they find this blueprint? Well, a key tool they use is something called the actantial model. It says pretty much every story can be broken down into the same 6 core players. It starts with a sender, who kicks off a quest to deliver an object to a receiver. Our hero, the subject, is the one who has to make this happen. Of course, they get support from helpers while being challenged by, you guessed it, opponents.
Let's make this real. Let's apply this model to a story we all know, the parable of the Good Samaritan. The beaten traveler is clearly the receiver, and the object he desperately needs is health. The Samaritan steps in as the heroic subject who delivers it. His supplies, the oil, the wine, the inn, are the helpers, and the robbers are the opponents. And just like that, you can see this hidden universal framework just pop out from a familiar story. Pretty cool, right?
But, for all its cool ideas, structuralism didn't last forever. It was often criticized because, its jargon was super technical and complex. Plus, a lot of the time, its deep insights didn't sound all that different from what you'd get just by reading the text carefully. Eventually, people started moving on to other methods.
All right, let's switch gears and look at our second tool, rhetorical criticism, which takes a completely different path. Instead of digging for some hidden, universal blueprint, this one looks at the text as a visible, really skillfully crafted argument that's designed to persuade an audience. Basically, this approach treats a text like a speech. It's always asking, how is this text trying to convince me of something? What rhetorical moves is it making? And while it might look at the author's situation, its main focus is always on the text's raw power of persuasion. So, the ancient Greeks and Romans, who were masters of this stuff, they broke speeches down into 3 main types. You've got judicial, which is all about the past. Think courtroom drama. Then there's deliberative, which looks to the future. Think a political debate. And finally, epidictic, which focuses on the present, using praise or blame at a ceremony to reinforce shared values.
And these speeches usually followed a pretty predictable playbook, a classic 6-part structure. You'd have an intro to win over the audience, a statement of the facts, the main point or thesis, the arguments to back it up, a section to tear down your opponent's points, and finally, a big, powerful conclusion. And believe it or not, scholars use this exact template to analyze ancient texts.
So what does this look like in practice? Well, a great example is the New Testament book of Galatians. Some scholars, like Hans-Dieter Betz, argue it's a judicial speech where the author Paul is defending his past actions. Others, like Ben Witherington, see it as a deliberative speech, trying to persuade his readers toward a future course of action. The really crucial point here is that either way, the text becomes this active, dynamic argument, not just some static container of theology.
Okay, so we've got these two really different toolkits, right? One's like a treasure hunter with a map to a hidden structure, and the other is like a debate coach analyzing a killer speech. So let's put them side by side and see how they stack up.
Yeah, this really makes the contrast super clear, doesn't it?
Structuralism pretty much ignores the author to find these universal patterns, but for rhetorical criticism, the author's intent to persuade is everything. One uses abstract models, the other uses real historical speech patterns. And that last point is a big one. While structuralism is mostly a thing of the past, rhetorical criticism is still a huge deal for scholars today.
When you really get down to it, what both of these approaches show us is that these ancient writings weren't just dry information. They were alive. They were powerful communications designed to have an impact. As one scholar puts it so well, they are often theology in the service of persuading the readers to adopt a certain course of action.
And honestly, that's the big idea I want you to walk away with. When we understand how a text works, whether it's the hidden grammar of its story or the artful structure of its argument, we move beyond just the words on the surface. We start to appreciate the artistry and purpose behind it all, and we get a much richer understanding of what it actually means.
But, the story of how we find meaning, it doesn't actually stop here. If meaning isn't just in the author's head, and it's not just locked away in the text structure, where else could it be? Well, that leaves one last, really fascinating piece of the puzzle: us, the reader. And we're going to get into that next time.